you are at the Minneapolis Club, so welcome. And you are at the co-hosted by Upsize Minnesota and Club E Lessons Learned panel discussion today. Hi, I'm Rick Brimacombe, and welcome to our conversation. Lessons learned is something that we have talked about and done kind of different flavors of this in past. The intention is to provide you some valuable information from domain experts and hopefully get something out of today that maybe you don't necessarily have to go to the school of hard knocks for or to go through the painful trial and error process. So the goal today is to provide you some background on the entrepreneurial operating system, otherwise known as EOS, intellectual property, primarily brands and trademarks, as well as exit planning and strategies. To help better your business and to help business owners such as yourselves learn from best practices. As I mentioned, Upsize Minnesota and Club E has assembled today's event, and we're going to introduce a panel of experts to serve as your trusted advisors. Upsize Magazine is a how-to business magazine helping business owners build bigger and more profitable companies. And Club E and my firm, Brimacombe Capital, inspire business owners like you to achieve more than you thought possible by providing strategic advice and financial support. In our efforts to provide actionable content, Upsize Minnesota and Club E offer you today's panel. And as such, I'd like to introduce you to our event sponsors. Be Better Success Coaching is an EOS implementer, and the OSHA Environmental Compliance Systems, otherwise known as OECS, Workplace Safety Experts, is one of our sponsors today. Key Strategies, Strategic Advice and Exit Planning, and Winthrop and Weinstein, a general practice law firm. So thank you to our sponsors. I'm excited to have our panelists here. By definition, the folks that are on the panels are domain experts, but today I'm super excited to have everybody here because I've known everybody on the panel for a number of years and have interacted with all of them both professionally and personally, so it's a joy and a pleasure to have you all here. So thank you for joining us. And with that, I want to introduce our panelists and then have them have an opportunity to tell you a little bit about their backgrounds. So to my immediate left is Chris Naylor, a certified EOS implementer at Be Better Success Coaching and the visionary owner at the OSHA Environmental Compliance Systems. Welcome.
Good job.
Julie Keys, speaker and exit strategy consultant and owner of Key Strategies. Welcome, Julie.
Thanks, Mike.
And then Steve Bard is partner and chair of the Trademark and Brand Management Group at Winthrop and Weinstein. He's also founder and lead author of the award-winning Duets Blog. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Rick.
And then before we get to our panel today, I do have some questions here that I will certainly lead the conversation with, but I want to make sure that folks ask questions if they would like. So as we're going through the event today, if there's something you'd like to contribute or you'd like clarify or add something, please raise your hand and I'll work you into the conversation. So with the introduction, why don't we now take a little bit of time here and have everybody spend some more time giving more detail on their background. Chris, let's start with you.
Thank you very much, Rick, and thank you for your dedication to supporting entrepreneurs and inspiring us to be better.
Thank you.
Really appreciate all the work you do for the community.
Thank you.
And that's what I love, the fellowship of this inspirational entrepreneurial community. It's like none other. It's like a great club to be in, right? It's exclusive, right? Only 6% of adults are managing small businesses of all the adult population in the U.S. Only 6%, so it's exclusive, right? It's also a great place to meet people and welcome to all. And you know what? There's nothing like the community of entrepreneurs, and that's why I just love being part of this group here today as well. So my passion and purpose for what I do is helping business owners and entrepreneurs create healthy, growing companies with rock-solid cultures. All right, that's what I'm passionate about. I've had the opportunity to do that for 30-some years, and wow, what a ride it's been. So my background, a little bit about my background, Rick asked me to provide. I came from a small business family in Bemidji, Minnesota, right? Naylor Electric, anyone heard of it?
No.
You've heard of it. All right. It's like the Best Buy of the North. Yeah, and then there's my grandmother's Curl Up and Dye Salon. Curl Up and Dye Salon. Grandma Irene, All right? So that's how I grew up. You were either a business owner or you were a member of clergy. Okay? So, not to be one of the mold of the nailers, I went off after college and worked in big business consulting, change management. Learned a lot of great practices, but really got tired of the big egos, big buyouts, big money. Came back to my roots, started to raise a family, and started a coaching consulting business called Be Better. That was 12 years ago. Now, about 6 years ago, along comes EOS, okay? Entrepreneurial Operating System. Who's familiar with it here? Everybody, pretty much, right? Okay. EOS is a system that I teach our clients that helps them manage their business, right? Create more profit, run more effectively, efficiencies, synergies, consistencies in the business, getting a great culture built, right people in the right seat. It systemizes your organization. And you know, today there are 10,000 companies running on EOS. 10,000. Just in the Twin Cities, there are 2,000 companies with implementers that have implemented it into the organization. That is not including all of these self-implementers that are trying to implement EOS into their organizations. So if you serve other businesses, be aware of the connection you can make with EOS implementers and companies out there, because we do a lot of sharing of business leads as well. We want to build the community, and we love sharing great leads. So that's EOS. It's really an entrepreneurial system for $2 million to $50 million in revenue, 10 to 250 employees. On average, after the first year of being on EOS, we estimate a 20% improvement in growth. Okay, so that's where we're at with EOS. Now, to practice what I preach, I also sit in the visionary owner seat of a safety company that Rick was trying to describe.
Which I have to preface it by saying we did have a branding conversation about what they call their company, so it was apropos that I stumbled a little bit on the name, which I apologize for.
This is why I'd like to change the name. As a visionary, that is one of my first things. And of course, I haven't won that battle yet with my integrator. But OSHA Environmental Compliance Systems. Okay, we go into large job sites like the Target Center or US Bank Stadium, and we make sure employees are safe, both in commercial construction and also in manufacturing. We've got 25 employees, been around for 25 plus years. We're growing 20% a year on EOS. Right? And it's been a great ride. So I'm just wondering about a statistic that maybe you are familiar with, maybe not. Today, only 5% of business owners get what they want from their business. 5%. That means 95% are not getting what they want from their business. So show of hands, you guys, how many of you are actually business owners? You own your own company. Okay, so a good majority here. Great. Well, let me just share with you what I hear and what you probably deal with every day and why you may not be getting everything you want out of your business. There's about 5 different issues I hear continually. People issues. How many of you have people issues? Okay, not accountable, maybe personality stuff, maybe not effective at their job. How many of you are experiencing lack of profit? Anybody dare to say they're experiencing? Yeah. You're selling a lot, but the costs are chewing everything up, right? How many of you have hit the ceiling in your business? Like you're just bumping your head against this ceiling in revenue. Very, very common, right? And how many of you are experiencing burnout? Because entrepreneurs typically work 24/7.
Yeah.
Okay, a lot of burnout. And the last one, how many of you have taken the magic pills? Magic pills, quick fixes that don't pan out.
Oh, okay. All right.
We buy into them and they don't pan out. And that's why I'm thrilled to be here today, just be able to provide any insight and share any knowledge that can help you maybe bring your business up to the next level so you can be in the 95%, or if you're there, you're going to stay there. So I really appreciate your time today, and thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. Julie.
All right. Great to be here once again, Rick. Thanks so much. So, as Rick said, I own a company called Key Strategies, and like Chris, I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. And I don't want to tell you how many years, because it's a lot. And I became a grandmother this year, so I can't even believe that. I feel like I'm still 30. I know I don't look 30, but I feel like I am.
You do.
But I really, I really learned a lot over those years of being a business owner. And when I became an advisor in 2011, I started working with business owners to help them grow and improve, similar to what Chris does. But I had more of a slant towards helping businesses and helping owners exit well and plan for their exit early. And I started doing seminars on exit planning and learned about the Exit Planning Institute, which is based in Cleveland. And they're a global organization, and they certify advisors in exit planning. And so as a certified exit planner, starting in 2015, most of the business that I work on right now with business owners is to help them plan for an exit so that they can exit on their own terms and not someone else's. And this isn't something that you can do in a few months. So the target client that I work with, small business, similar to Chris, somewhere between 5 and 30 million in revenue is where the majority of my clients are. I'm also the chapter president for the Exit Planning Institute. So if you've ever heard of EPI, we have a meeting every month here in the Twin Cities, primarily made up of professional advisors who work with business owners. However, we do have business owners who attend our meetings because the content is all driven towards exit planning knowledge. And so if you're interested in attending, you're always welcome to come. I'm a volunteer and I run that organization, and I'm also a faculty member for EPI. And so we teach the SEPA program in 6 or 7 places across the country every single year, and I teach one of the components of the SEPA program, and I love it. Because I get to tell stories about my clients, and that's one of the best ways, I think, to be able to instruct and teach clients what goes on, in exit planning, what can go wrong, what can go right. And so primarily that's what I do. I also do some workshops. I do online virtual workshops for advisors and for business owners on exit planning. And I'm happy to be here.
Great. And the EPI and Club E are doing a joint event on April 11th.
We are right here.
Yes, and we're going to be talking about employees, recruiting, retaining, incenting,
Yes.
tough job market. We're going to actually get to that, one of the questions later. So,
Right. Well, and that would be not just an advisor-driven content, but that would also be business owner-driven content. So if you're an advisor, I would encourage you to bring your owners because, like Chris said, the workforce issues and retaining good people is really a problem. But yeah, I'm looking forward to those joint
okay.
meetings. It'll be
Was
great.
there an entrepreneur in your history, family history?
Yeah, going back, well, both of my parents were self-employed. I grew up in a small town as well. And my grandparents on both sides of my family were all entrepreneurs. So yeah, we definitely lived and breathed our own business.
Okay,
growing up,
Chris, Julie, we had a history of people having their own businesses and so forth. And Steve, how about you? What's your background, and was there an entrepreneur or 2 or 5 in your family?
Really, no entrepreneurs in the
Okay.
family. Worked over the last 30 years with a lot of entrepreneurs. As Rick mentioned, I'm Steve Baird. I chair Winthrop & Weinstein's Intellectual Property Department. I've been at the firm about 15 years now. Before that, I was a partner at Fish & Richardson, a large international intellectual property firm, and before that, a partner at Dorsey & Whitney. So I've seen a lot of different kinds of firms, and Winthrop is a law firm, general practice firm of about 120 lawyers, and I kind of head up the intellectual property practice. One of the things that, for those in the room who aren't overly familiar with intellectual property or IP, it's certainly a buzzword in the business community, and everybody seems to want a piece of intellectual property. I think of it in terms of intangible property that helps a business maintain its competitive edge. Chris mentioned the word exclusivity, and think of it as exclusivity is what intellectual property is all about. It's being able to prevent others from doing things that you do. It creates that moat around your business to protect you from competitors coming too closely. Intellectual property is a really broad, general term. There are so many different subspecialties that fall underneath that umbrella. You have patents, you have copyrights, you have trademarks. Trademarks and brand protection is my passion, and it's really what I've focused on in my career over the last almost 30 years. Then there's trade secrets, and If none of those apply, then you can protect ideas through agreements, even though the idea may not be something that rises to the level of patent protection. So you think of a non-disclosure agreement, basically protecting the thoughts and the processes that you have, and trade secrets can be protected that way too. So, being a trademark specialist, when I hear names like Curl Up and Dye Salon, I mean, I love that stuff because that's where we can shine, and that's where we can help companies that come up with unique names keep them unique. We'll have a chance to talk a lot more down the road about some of the more specifics, but what I think that we do in terms of bringing value to the table for a business really at any stage of the life cycle, whether it's a startup or whether it's a Fortune 50 company, helping the company and meeting the company where they're at to build intellectual property value within a company, to help that differentiation from other businesses and to create that moat, that barrier that keeps competitors at a safe distance. And there are just a variety of ways that we use as strategic partners with our clients to layer different forms of intellectual property protection. We understand all the tools that are in the toolbox and which ones to use for which task, and oftentimes you're using a lot of tools together to advance a client's goals.
Tell everybody a little bit about the Duets blog in case somebody would like to
Yeah, Duets Blog was my brainchild. So it's my one spark of genius in entrepreneurial aspect while somebody else is paying for it, which is perfect. But the Duets Blog we had a marketing director a little over 10 years ago who said, hey, content marketing and thought leadership is where the future is going. And so it was her vision that we would have an intellectual property blog. And I remember dragging my heels for probably 2 years during those discussions saying, the last thing I wanted to do was start a blog and then not see it through, because there's a graveyard full of blogs that had a great start and then fizzled out. We're still here 10 years later, one of the top IP blogs, top 10 in the world. What makes us different from all the intellectual property blogs out there is, it goes to the heart of the name, Duets Blog. The whole concept was to facilitate a more graceful collaboration between legal and marketing types. We're well aware of the fact that marketers wait to the last minute, maybe don't even call a lawyer because lawyers can tend to be Dr. No. They get in the way of the creative process. They stifle creativity oftentimes. And so our whole goal was to kind of bring a fresh perspective to that relationship. And so the site, I've posted over 800 blog posts over the last 10 years. We've got over 2,500 blog posts over the last 10 years on just about any topic that you can imagine. So I would encourage anyone to check it out. It is intentionally written from the perspective of readers that are non-lawyers. We have competitors that learn a lot as well from the blog, so we definitely write in an intelligent and insightful way, but it's geared toward shedding the legalese and the legal jargon to try to meet clients and business owners who can maybe be entertained by the writing, but also learn things that they can implement into their business.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing that. All right, so the way I designed today's event, now that we know a little bit about everybody and their backgrounds and perspectives on the topic, have a part here for them to share their thoughts on the topic and their respective areas of expertise, and then I'll have some specific questions for everybody. So why don't we come all the way back down here, Chris, and tell us a little bit more about the topic and your thoughts and perspectives.
Well, I was thinking about, what kind of common issues do my 80-some clients later, have? And I came up with 3. I think we all kind of thought we would pare it down to 3 big ones. And if you can nail these 3 in small business, you will gain the traction you're looking for. The first one is how to build a great culture. I mean, culture is this soft, fuzzy, gooey thing, right? How do you build a great culture? It's not perceived as a hard business strategy, yet we can see that people who have great cultures in their businesses attract great talent, they're more profitable, they're more productive, they're more efficient and effective, there's greater peace of mind. They might even have a talent pipeline where you don't have to worry about hiring people because there are people sitting in jobs in other companies waiting for an opening in your company. And that's what we have in our safety company. So I know it's real. It used to all be theory to me, but now that I'm running a company too, it's real. And so the culture, how do you do that? How do you systemize? How do you operate? How do you structure? How do you communicate to have that culture? Anybody read Simon Sinek? Okay, Power Why, Find Your Why. Well, guess what? He says that customers will never love your company until employees love it first. Customers will never love your company the way they could until the employees love it first. So that's all about culture, right? So it's core values. In the EOS system, of course, we create core values with our clients. Core values already exist. They're not something that, is a poster on a wall that we want to be. They already exist. They're already embedded. And we want to reinforce and build off that and hire, fire, review, reward, recognize, and coach on core values. So core values are core to culture. And mission, finding your why. Why do you exist? What is your purpose, cause, and passion? And then getting people on board to actually be part of that and be excited about that and want to jump on that bus, your bus of purpose, cause, and passion. So culture is my number one. If you can figure out how to dial in a great culture, all the business indicators of success start to improve, and you'll have greater peace of mind with regard to the future. Number two was core processes. That's kind of an oxymoron for entrepreneurs. I can start to see glazed eyes already, rolling of eyes maybe, and it's always the hardest one with my clients to dial in. But core processes are the driver of businesses. In this system called EOS, we're not talking about detailed documentation that goes into a book and gets dust on the shelf, right? We're talking about checklists of how the flow of activity works through the various departments in your business. So core processes drive the business for efficiency, consistency. Wouldn't it be great if everyone showed up the same way when dealing with a customer? Wouldn't it be great if onboarding was consistent? Wouldn't it be great if performance management was consistent, or we did accounting in the best and right way that's most efficient and effective? And isn't that great peace of mind for business owners who then know that their employees are following the best process? That's peace of mind. That's what we're after. So dialing in that high-level checklist in each area and function in the business. The third area of improvement is death by meeting. Anybody read that book? All right, death by meeting. Meetings typically are horrible for most small business companies. They usually don't start on time or end on time. There's usually never an agenda. You might have one for a while, but then you drop the agenda. Then there's usually someone who's dominating the meeting where everyone else is quiet. And then there's no accountability. So we have a meeting for an hour or two, but then nothing happens, and it's Groundhog's Day the next time the same issue comes up again. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Death by meeting, right? So in the EOS system, we teach the level 10 weekly meeting, which is a 90-minute meeting. It's considered the best way to accomplish goals for companies. And having that EKG every single week, just like we need the EKG to stay functional, organizations need that meeting pulse, that EKG, to gain traction in their business. And if we have the right agenda and we're on time, start on time, we end on time, and it's the same day, and early is on time, by the way, right? Early is on time. On time's late. Everybody know that one?
Yeah.
Okay, Vince Lombardi. Then you'll gain that traction in your business. So those are the three big things, really thinking about culture and how to dial that in, honing in on those core processes, and then making your meetings powerful. Thank you.
A question on the EOS, how much does that tie into culture? I know that the processes and the meeting, that is tied into EOS, but what about the culture component? Is that tied in as well?
Well, when you figure core values are a main hallmark of EOS, hire, fire, review, reward, recognize, and coach on core values. Core values also are integrated into the level 10 weekly meeting as far as people headlines. So we talk about, and celebrate who actually is living the core values in the company. So if that's a part of a goal for the company for that year to really dial in, understand, and build culture, then that becomes a goal in the VTO, the Vision Traction Organizer, which is the high-level strategic plan. That becomes a goal, and each quarter there are going to be rocks, 90-day priorities that help hit that goal. So if it's a priority, because you need to build it, you just build it into your EOS system.
Okay, great, thank you. Julie?
Yeah, so exit planning. What is exit planning? I get asked that question all the time. What is exit planning? I've never heard of it. So how many people have ever heard of what an exit planner might do or be? A few people. Okay, well, good. So the word's getting out. So I'll just tell you a little story. I was at a conference not too long ago, and we were at a break. And you know how people kind of circle up and start talking to each other? So I was in this circle, and we're talking, and this guy asked me, he said, "So what do you do, Julie?" And I said, "I'm an exit planner." And he, physically took a step back, and his eyes got, really big. And he goes, "You mean you help people exit the planet?" I said, "No, not that kind of exit." So not that kind of exit. So lots of you guys know what it is, so that's cool. So I don't actually do a lot of projects with my clients. I actually help them figure out what it is that they need and want, and figure out what their timeline is, and help them understand the difference between business readiness and owner readiness. So owner readiness means that they would need to get their legal house in order and work with people like Steve and Steve's firm. They would need to get a good idea of what their business is worth, and many times they don't know what it's worth. They think it's worth a lot more than what it actually is. That happens a lot. Many times they don't have a good relationship with a wealth manager, and so they don't even know how they're going to be able to maintain their lifestyle going into retirement, if that's what they plan to do. And so we don't really talk about retirement when we talk about owner readiness. We talk about next act planning. What's your next act? What are you going to do? What would you like to do? And when would you like to do it? In business readiness, that has a lot more to do with some of the work that Chris does. Chris and I do some similar work, but I don't spend as much time on building the business and getting that ready as she does. But I do help identify areas that definitely need work. And usually there are some similar areas that my clients will have, whereas they'll have the wrong people in the wrong seats. They will have customer concentration issues. They will have more dependency on themselves than what they should, even if they have all kinds of people around them in different departments and leaders. And so those are the things that need to be identified. One of the biggest struggles that business owners have is just coming to grips with the fact that there has to be an exit someday. And right now, I actually have 3 clients that are in the process of transition. And so when I say transition in my mind is a component of exit. So if I'm going through a transition, I might be buying out a partner, I might be buying another company, and I might be exiting. And so 3 right now are 2 of them actually are in the process of buying a business to grow, and one of them is in the process of due diligence. And so an LOI has been signed, they've agreed on it, purchase agreement is on the way, and we're talking now about what does that life plan look like? And where do I see myself in 3 to 5 years? How do I want to spend my time? Many owners have a hard time looking into the future and imagining what their life would be like without their business. That whole sense of relevancy is a big deal. Like, how am I going to remain productive? How will I remain fulfilled? And if you talk to any investment banker or business broker out there, they will tell you that they've had deals where the owner actually sabotaged their own deal. Yeah, because they're afraid. Well, they can't run this company the way I have. And this doesn't mean that it's a micro, small company. We're talking about even larger companies. So it's a really big issue. And if you're a business advisor, I would recommend that you think about some of the clients that you're working with that might be in this space right now, and take a stand for them, and ask a few questions once in a while. Don't pretend that it's not an issue, because it is. And really, many times, business owners are just waiting for somebody to ask them the questions, because many times they don't even know where to start. They don't know who to talk to. They don't know what the important components are. And so when it comes to the exit planning process, they really don't know. And many times they'll call their CPA. And their CPA is one person that definitely needs to be on that exit planning team. But there are other people that need to be on that exit planning team. And there needs to be someone who drives the process, a quarterback, right? A coordinator. That's basically what I do. So if we need people like Steve on the team, if we need people to come in and do EOS implementation, if I need a wealth manager or a CPA or someone to do valuation, those are the people that I have on my team. Those are the people that I will refer my clients to work with. One of the things that I find that business owners have a resistance to, though, is working with someone that they don't know. And so I think that it's important to establish those relationships as early as possible. And there are many who are professional advisors that work with business owners who tend to be a little more transactional than relationship-minded. And so if you work with business owners, it's important to think relationship versus transaction. And it's important to have people that aspire towards those values and towards that philosophy if you're going to have people on your team that you need to bring in certain situations. Business owners are really, really looking for that. So of the clients that I'm working with, like I said, I have 3 that are kind of in an M&A mode where they're either buying or selling, and then I have a few other ones who are getting ready. So we're getting ready. We're dialing in the financials and recasting and normalizing. We're hiring better people. We're adopting better hiring practices. We're looking at the people that are underperforming and what is it that we can do to try to bring them up. Is there a way that we can do that? One thing that we're learning, though, and one client in particular who's learning this as we've been having these conversations, is hiring on a resume doesn't work. You really need to think about hiring from drive, ambition, and intangible qualities, because you really can't teach that. They either have it or they don't. And I've noticed that with many of my clients, that they have people in key positions who can only deliver substandard performance because that's as far as they can go. And if we're looking for something better, then it puts them in a really tough spot. So just a couple more things about what I do. Like I said, I work with business owners in transition, and then I help them make decisions on whether there's going to be an internal or an external sale. If there's going to be an internal sale and it's a family business, we need to think about grooming a successor if they haven't already. If there's one thing that I've noticed in family business too, is they don't always have those conversations. A lot of times assumptions are made, and mom or dad or both are assuming that their son or daughter are going to take over, but they haven't really had a deep conversation about it. Maybe they throw it around at a birthday dinner, but they don't actually have a plan, and family governance isn't always in existence. And so knowing people who specialize in family governance is a good thing. Knowing people who specialize in family business psychology is a good thing, because they're so afraid to ruin Thanksgiving. But if they're not talking about these things, they pretty much already have, right? Yeah. So one other thing that I'm working on right now, because I've been a woman entrepreneur my whole life, I'm writing a book right now called Poised for Exit. And the book is for women business owners in transition. And I just feel that women have kind of a different set of problems, if you will, aside from all of the other things that entrepreneurs face in planning a business and closing it down or selling it or transitioning it to another owner. So the book is about that, and there's a workbook that goes with it, and I'm really excited about that. And I think that's all I had to talk about for me
Great.
now. So
Great. Well, thank you. We'll come back with some additional questions. Steve.
Thank you, Rick. In terms of lessons learned from an intellectual property perspective, I think probably I'll start out talking real broadly again about intellectual property, and I think that it's important to upfront think about an IP audit. So the company can identify what are the intangible assets that the company has. What is that secret sauce that makes your business different from others? What would really bother you if a competitor started to do? And so in terms of relationships, I think it's a great idea to have an intellectual property lawyer in your team who can help you through that process of identifying what you have, what you can own, what you can leverage, what you can license. In terms of the more specifics about lessons learned from a trademark perspective, I think the time to thinking about engaging with a specialist that knows about trademark law would be when you're coming up with the name for the company. And so we will collaborate a lot with naming consultants or with business owners who know that when they're about to enter an intersection, they've got to look both ways, right? And so when you're starting a new business, everybody's got a name, right? Everyone might not have a patent. Everyone might not have copyright protection, but everyone has a name. And under United States law, which is different from every other country in the world, when you hang that shingle and start to do business under a particular name, you start to generate what we call common law rights, unregistered trademark rights. The danger there, though, is that those, if you don't seek to federally register those rights, your rights will be limited to the geographic area where you happen to be operating. Federal registration gives you nationwide protection, and it gives a business owner the ability to freely expand and grow over time and kind of grow into those rights. I like to think of the analogy to Swiss cheese. If you relied purely on common law or unregistered rights, you might end up having rights that look like Swiss cheese, where you start to want to expand geographically, you want to start to expand your product mix or your service mix of goods and services, and all of a sudden you start to realize that other third parties have generated rights in confusingly similar names in other parts of the country. And if you haven't done things right up front and registered those rights nationally, not only are you in a position where you can't stop those third parties from using a confusingly similar name, they could stop you from expanding your business. And so it's probably the single most important lesson to understand as an entrepreneur, a small business owner, is to federally register the name of the business if you can. And so, the starting point would be to do a clearance search. Most people are familiar with Google and with the USPTO's database where you can do some trademark searching. It's a very nuanced area, and so in terms of relationships, I will have informal conversations with business owners before they're ready to start hiring a lawyer. Maybe you want to interview a couple of different lawyers and bounce some ideas off them to see what kinds of thought process they bring to the table before the meter starts to run. And I always encourage business owners to do that, because it's important when you want to develop that relationship to understand that it's not only going to be about the money. It's about the long term. It's about building a relationship that lasts over time. Just to share one quick story about years ago, worked with one of the big banks in town on a rebrand. They were going to really change a very boring name into one that was going to be pretty unique. And so they had hired another large, I'm not even sure if they're in business anymore, but another large naming firm and marketing company to come up with a lot of names. And they had about 30 names that had survived several cuts. And so now they were ready to feed those to the lawyers to, devour and hope that maybe 3 survived from that mix. Well, so I got the project from the in-house lawyer who said, okay, here are the 30 names. We want to do full searches on all of these names. Well, that's an expensive process. Just to get the research is about $750, $800 for a full comprehensive search. The best practice is to do a knockout search before you spend that additional $750 just to get the report, and then there's probably another $750 to get, a lawyer's oral views on what the results of the search show. And so I said, well, we probably ought to do knockout searches on these 30 before we, have the truck back up with, all of these search reports and spend thousands and thousands of dollars. And they said, oh, no, the marketing agency that we hired, that's part of the engagement, and they've already done the knockout searches. And I said, okay, well, all right. So we ordered, the truck backed up, boxes and boxes of full search reports. And I can't tell you how many times page 1, knockout, page 2, knockout, just one after the other. And I share that just because even a professional firm that comes up with names and is very conversant with the processes and the procedures of trademark issues, it's not what they do on a day-to-day basis, and they don't understand the legal nuances that go into knowing what's a knockout and what's not a knockout. So that can be, you can save yourself a lot of time and effort. Say an ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure.
All righty.
Yeah.
Well, let's stay down there. A couple of IP questions for you, and then we'll come back down this direction. So what do entrepreneurs and business owners most misunderstand about intellectual property, and in particular, trademarks?
I think that the whole concept of intellectual property can be confusing to entrepreneurs, and the different labels for those different kinds of intellectual property. Under that umbrella of intellectual property from a trademark perspective, I think what many don't appreciate is the breadth of coverage that can be associated with trademark rights. Everyone's familiar with the Apple iPhone. Well, Apple went to the Patent and Trademark Office and they obtained a number of design patents that covered the subtle curvatures and the edges of the iPhone. And then they won, multi-million-dollar damage awards against Samsung for infringing those design patents. Well, design patents don't last forever. They have a limited shelf life, depending on, they're typically about 15 years from the date of issuance. And so the power of a trademark and the breadth of a trademark is you can actually own as a trademark configurations of products, design features that may be protected by design patents. And so the best practice is if you have a uniquely shaped product, seek design patent protection that gives you exclusive rights during the period when you're now making sure that your marketing materials are speaking in a trademark kind of way to say, we want to own that design even after the trademark right, the patent rights expire. We did that for a handgun manufacturer in Germany, the James Bond gun of choice. So we actually doubled the number of trademark registrations that exist for handguns. When we entered the picture for Walther and the PPK and the P99, there were only 3 that had ever been registered as trademarks before. And we doubled that number in 1 year for Walther by going to the trademark office and saying, you know what, if someone sees the shape and contour of this gun, they know who put it out, they know what the source is, they don't even need to have the name or the logo on it to know. And the power of that is there's an enormous problem in counterfeiting in the industry. And so to be able to own the shape of a product, the counterfeiter may be smart enough to know not to put the logo on it, not to put the name on it, but if you have the ability to protect the shape, that's a real power that can last forever as long as that mark continues to be used. So think of 3 things when you think about a trademark. Think of any subject matter that can be perceived by a human being can serve as a trademark that potentially could last forever, as long as it identifies goods and services, if it distinguishes those goods and services from others, and if it identifies the source. And the source doesn't have to be known. You don't have to know the name of the company that puts out a particular product, but if people see that shape and they know it's not generic and they know that it only comes from one place, then you have the makings of a trademark. And that's an enormously powerful right that can literally last forever.
Great. You mentioned in that knockout search example what probably was a fairly costly mistake on that particular client's situation. But if you were to try to rank them, what might have been the most significant or costly mistake that you saw a entrepreneur business owner make when it came to either their business name or trademark?
One of the things that entrepreneurs, when they're starting out, they're understandably wanting to do as much as they can on their own. And I'll pick up a lot of clients after they've tried to go down a path and then run into a brick wall or fallen into a ditch. And just a recent example of a local Minnesota-based brewery that came up with a name. They did the filing themselves. They had done some searching themselves. Their application was examined at the trademark office, and they got back a refusal that said, hey, we know you're just wanting to use this mark for beer, but there's a Canadian wine company that has the same name for bottles of wine. And it doesn't seem intuitive, but trademark laws are broad enough, and the trademark office oftentimes will view wine and beer as significantly close and overlapping enough that depending on what the name is, if it's kind of a unique name, it's going to be very difficult to use that name and not have a likelihood of confusion. And so in this particular case, the business owner saw that refusal and then sought out to contact the owner in Canada to see if they would be willing to consent. And I love the idea behind it and wanting to just go along and get along, but the trademark world can be kind of a cruel business. And what I always tell business owners is, don't ask for permission unless you're prepared to live with no, and then follow that. What we can do then is start to identify scabs that might be associated with those rights, or we can bring a more intelligent conversation to creating leverage that will induce that Canadian winery to say, okay, yeah, we'll give you consent. That never happens out of the chute. It never happens when a business owner calls on their own hoping to avoid a conflict, because there's just no incentive to say yes. It's like, why would I limit my rights to be nice? Unfortunately, that's kind of the business world that we live in. But engaging a trademark expert up front, you can help to identify that things aren't always black and white. There is a lot of gray. There's a lot to be lost in fighting. And so once you have an advocate in your corner, you can achieve those goals most likely in a way that you wouldn't be able to on your own.
Great. Thank you. Hey, Chris, why don't we jump down here? You mentioned that there were 2,000 or so companies using EOS in the Twin Cities. Why do you think so many companies are running EOS here locally? And then when you've worked with the number of those businesses, what do you see as their main challenge?
Sure. Mike Payton is from the Twin Cities. He helped Gino write the second book, Get a Grip. And because he's here, anybody heard of Mike Payton? Right? And he's a dynamic speaker. He made the rounds through Vistage groups, CEO roundtables, special events, and just started to, kind of spread the word. And he had so much zeal and passion around the system, it actually attracted people like me who saw him and said, I'd love to help people with this system as well. So I think because we had Peyton here, because Gino doesn't travel, Gino doesn't leave Detroit, he doesn't like to fly. And Detroit has a couple implementers, but whereas we have about 30 implementers. Not all are certified, but there's a lot of EOS implementers trained around the Twin Cities. And we're all busy. There isn't a problem with that. And because the system has gotten so much buzz in CEO roundtables, a couple different times existing clients have talked to their CEO roundtable, talked about the results they're getting. Pretty soon, a couple of their buddies want to try it, And so it kind of is a word of mouth. And personally, I just work on 100% referral and just do great work. It's a great, brilliant system. And that's kind of how it works. So I think it started with Mike Payton.
Okay.
Biggest challenge
Yeah,
with
for
EOS?
those companies or the people using that. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So what I see and what is critical to the entire system working is that we have a lack of integrators. Okay. There aren't enough good integrators. Now, most of my companies have been founded and run by visionaries. Visionaries are very different. Do any of you here fall into the visionary camp? Are there any visionaries? Okay, okay. How many of you work for visionaries? Aha. So visionaries, I can make fun of them because I am one. Okay, so we kind of fall into a whole bunch of funny syndromes like shiny ball syndrome. Our head is going this way and that way. Also called organizational whiplash. So we need that integrator to just hold us accountable, keep us focused on the plan, but they couldn't be more opposite roles. And to be able to go toe-to-toe with a strong visionary, it takes a strong integrator. It's not just an admin person doing your bidding. It's someone who can really push back. It's the Roy and Walt Disney scenario. Obviously Walt was a genius, right? But did you know he was a street person until Roy came along and systemized his ideas and turned it into what you see today? That's the promise of a visionary. In this marketplace, I think we really maybe suffer from lack of awareness of what a good integrator does. We find ways to kind of piecemeal integrators into an organization if we don't have one in the company, and the fractional model can work, but the best is if there is somebody in the company that knows the company that can go toe-to-toe with the visionary and create that rocket fuel, the energy of the two opposites working together. That's the best route for our companies here locally and anywhere, really. And that's what drives EOS, is the integrator, because visionaries are off with big relationships, big ideas, shiny ball syndrome, right? Someone has to mind the shop and do the day-to-day and hold everyone accountable.
And you mentioned Gino Wickman, the founder of EOS. You've actually trained with him. What was your greatest takeaway from having that experience?
Great. Gino is he's a genius. He's a freak of nature. He took a very, very complicated type of topic, how to run a great small business with visionaries who don't stay focused, and created a system, a business management system to operate those businesses. And you can tell by the level that it has spread throughout the world. We've got implementers all over the world now today. That's awesome, but something really gritty, granular, and down to the ground that Gino taught me that gave me great peace of mind when I was starting this EOS journey was something called 4-2-1. Anybody heard of it? Okay. When you're building your business, it's just math. 4 warm leads equal 2 90-minute meetings equal 1 new client. And everybody has their own 4-2-1. You have your 4-2-1. It might be the same one that I use. But it gives you great peace of mind if you're trying to build this business that, you know what, you got to stay focused, trust the 4-2-1, do a good job with your customers, providing the product or delivering the service, and just know that in time that traction will happen. And sure enough, after about 2 years of 4-2-1ing, now I've 100% referral business.
Great, great. Julie, you mentioned that you came from a family of entrepreneurs and business owners, so you have a lifelong career as an entrepreneur, both as a person in your family of origin and then now as a business person. What are some of the toughest lessons that you've learned and seen over the years?
Well, how much time do we have?
Well, if you're following the script, not very much. So
Yeah, no,
I run a tight ship, as Wes knows. So
That's right. Yeah, so lots of lessons. I think the majority of the lessons that I learned were in the 1980s when we first started our business. Yeah, so I think that one of the biggest lessons that I learned that came back a couple times was in not using other people's money to do things, to buy things, to grow the business. We always had a cash-rich business. I didn't believe in debt. I still don't believe in debt. I have some debt, but I learned that lesson. And I saw too many companies go down because they had too much debt. But there are times when you do need to utilize lines of credit and other people's money. And so I learned that lesson early. And I try to help my clients, think that through too and make good decisions about money. And I think that another lesson that I learned that probably resonates with me more now because I am an advisor was I didn't have very good advisory. And I needed good advisory, but I didn't have it. And there, the term business coach or business advisor wasn't very popular in those days. You didn't really hear a lot about people that did work like that. You certainly didn't hear about exit planners. And so if I could do it over again, I think that I would make sure that I have someone on the outside that is a fit for me. And I think that fit is everything when it comes to hiring someone like that. But those would be the main lessons that I learned.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then now, as a business advisor and exit strategy expert, a business exit strategy, not a life exit strategy, what are some of the toughest lessons that you've seen your clients go through and learn?
One of the toughest is determining the value of the business and learning that it's worth a lot less than what they thought. That's one of the big ones, because it ends up then that they have to stay engaged in the business and grow the business longer than what they plan to. Another lesson is contingency planning or lack thereof. Regardless of whether you are just starting a business or you're in growth mode, you should always have good contingency planning because you never know when something could happen. And we call those the 5 Ds. So there's a thing called death. People do die. And if you have a partner and you don't have a buy-sell agreement and someone dies, your partner dies, you have kind of a problem there because you end up going into business with their spouse if they have one. So there's that. There's disability. People do get hurt. People do get sick. There's divorce. People do get divorced. There's disagreements between partners. There's disasters. There's cyber disaster, natural disaster, man-made disaster. So the stats are that about 50% of all businesses will go through at least one of the 5 Ds. And many businesses, I'd have to say that most that I work with, have 0 to no contingency planning. They have no plan for what happens if I don't come to work tomorrow. And so one of the first things that we do when we start talking about exit planning is to talk about that what if. Right? This is aside from having a good, solid estate plan. This is aside from having other legal documents in order. A contingency plan is not a legal document. All it is it's a written plan so that your head people know that if something happens, they know what your wishes are, right? Or you're on vacation and they get hacked. How do they get a hold of the IT person? How do they get a hold of the insurance guy? All of those kinds of things. So that's one of the big issues. So valuation, contingency planning. And then this is one that came up recently. So there's so many, right? I could go on on this, but there's one in particular that's come up a couple times actually with a couple of my clients. And it's where they're looking for someone to hire in a certain position. Let's just say it's a sales position, or one that I'm thinking about right now. And so we looked out there online to see what was out there in terms of like who might be available. Let's just see what they say on Indeed and LinkedIn and Glassdoor. Let's just see who might be out there applying. Let's just see what job descriptions are looking like. And I Googled this company name, and the only review that they had on Glassdoor and Indeed was a bad one from a former employee. So it's really important, I think, for employers to stage their company well. We want to push that one down, and we want to reply to it. We don't want to just ignore it. And so that was a painful lesson to learn, because I think that we lost a couple good candidates because of that.
Yeah, that's a bummer. All right, so again, if somebody has a question, please raise your hand, and I'll work you in. I will follow the list of questions we have and keep going, but again, feel free. And I see Jay sitting over here in the front, and I'm sure Jay could answer anybody's questions about valuations, at least at a high level after the session, if anybody has a question on valuations. All right, so hypothetical, you got a new client, and you're just getting started. What, in general, because obviously every situation is a little bit different, but in general, what's kind of the first initiative that you get going kind of right out of the chutes when you start working with somebody?
I'll start the ball rolling here. We have what is called the focus day in the EOS system. And in that day, that's what we do right out of the chutes. That's the first day-long session we have together. We create the organizational's accountability chart. The accountability chart is the right and best structure for the future. It's like a high-powered organizational chart with functions, not titles, and components in each seat, and then the owner of that seat. And the idea is if 2 or more people are responsible, no one is responsible, right? And so we always start that focus day with how are we organized, who's responsible for what, and what are the main responsibilities. And after that, we do a vision building day, and that is charting the future. That's your VTO, Vision Traction Organizer. It's about where you're going and how you're going to get there, your core values, your mission, your goals. So those are the first 2 days of working with a client. But accountability chart is the very first tool.
Okay, great. Julie, Steve?
Sure. I've got a checklist that I usually send out before my first meeting. It's a transition planning checklist, and it's a very general document. It's not anything too in-depth. I have knowing business owners and knowing their time constraints and how much attention they have, which, right, attention deficit. I try to keep it short and sweet, but there are questions that are on there that get them to be thinking about some of the things that they maybe would want to work on and what they'd want to start with and prioritize. And the other thing that I try to do right away is I try to establish rapport as strongly and quickly as possible. And how do I do that? I deliver as much value as I possibly can without worrying about whether I'm being compensated for it or not. I think that when it comes to having a relationship with someone like me, trust is paramount. And if they don't trust me, we're really not going to get very far. And I also believe that trust is a measurable, not an intangible attribute. It's not a business principle, right? Trust is not a business principle. It needs to be earned. However, I think that it can be earned quicker if your clients know that you really got their back. And so how I like to measure trust is if what I'm doing is taking a shorter period of time, then it's going to save time and it's going to save money, right? Because if my client trusts me, they're not going to drag their feet. They're going to take action and they're going to move forward, which is going to cost them less, especially if they're working with other advisors that charge by the hour. So therefore, that's how I see that trust is actually something that's measurable, and I try to establish it right away.
Great. Steve?
Julie, those are great comments. I totally echo those. When clients come to me or prospective clients, they've usually got a trademark problem. They've gotten a demand letter, cease and desist letter from someone else. They've tried to register their mark and they were denied, and so they're coming in with a specific problem that they need to address. And my goal is really to help them navigate that problem as quickly and easily and cheaply as possible, to then use that as a basis for building a long-term relationship, to say, now that you trust me, having gotten you through this crisis, let's start thinking more strategically, let's start thinking more proactively about how to build value in the company, utilizing intellectual property laws to your advantage.
Great. You all mentioned creating value for your clients, so taking that theme and running with it, what are the top couple of tools or strategies that you see with your clients that add the most value or have the best ROI?
Should I start it off? All right. Well, I would say that it all starts with that leadership team, because as the leadership team goes, so does the rest of the organization, becoming more cohesive. Because if the leadership team doesn't trust each other, people can't be open and honest. Even the goals that we're creating for the organization may be maybe not the best, maybe not the most strategic. Maybe some members of our leadership team aren't able to say what they really want to say. And so I really work with that team to be able to get them to be more open and honest, to trust one another. That is a foundational principle for EOS, is to build trust within the entire organization, because culture is built on trust as well, right? So it's so foundational. It should be so much in the DNA as we progress through this system, that getting that leadership team cohesive would be our first step. And that just takes time. It's earned. And over time, as the team meets for day-long sessions in this system, we meet for 8 hours each time we have a session, that trust starts to emerge. Sometimes we have a member of the leadership team self-select themselves out, where over time they just start to feel uncomfortable because it just isn't a fit, and now everyone's accountable, and it's this transparent organization, and I can't hide over here in the shadows. I can't buffalo anyone. So once in a while we get that to happen too. It all starts with that leadership team.
Great.
I'm just going to stick with the exit planning conversation. I think that's where I probably provide the most value right up front. And I think for me, in establishing that trust and establishing the relationship right away, I really want to focus on the owner and what it is that they really need and what they really want. Because I've lived that and I've been there and I understand where they're coming from, it's very rare that a business owner actually sits back and asks themselves, what do I really want? Because they're always serving and helping their employees, their customers and clients, their vendors, their colleagues, but they really don't take a lot of time to be introspective and think about what they really, really want and what they need. And sometimes they don't even know what they need. And so for me, I don't know that that's a measurable ROI really, but it really is where I start. And then we get into more of the tactical, but the tactical goes so much better when I can really get to know my clients and what makes them tick, and to get to know who the other decision makers are. So if there's more than one owner, if there's a family member who is, earmarked as the successor of the company, I've got to get those relationships established right away.
Great. Steve.
I'll just tell a little story that kind of builds on what I just described in the last answer. I've represented an entrepreneur from LeSueur, Minnesota for a number of years who originally came to me because he had just been sued for false advertising by 3M. He was the individual who founded Frog Tape. Anyone heard of Frog Tape? It's that green painter's tape. He was starting to get in the stores at Home Depot. Things were going really, really well, and then he got hit with this lawsuit. So we helped navigate that, helped him resolve that infringement lawsuit with 3M, and then once that was in the rearview mirror, then started to build a trademark portfolio to the point where when he sold the company, he was able to, when you think about trademark rights, it really, they are buckets that hold all of the goodwill and the blue sky that a business has. So in terms of valuation, it's a place to disperse that value over a variety of assets at sale time. And I know that at the time when we were recommending filings for different variations of the mark for different goods and services, it was like, is this not overkill? It quickly was revealed to not be overkill at the time of sale, when each one of those was a reservoir to hold goodwill for the business that was of significant value when with the lawsuit behind them and with now a portfolio of IP assets to help get a much larger sale price.
Okay, great. So how about the flip side of that question? So we were talking about things that worked and added value and created ROI. What initiatives, if any, do you see as kind of a relatively weak contribution, or the ROI is maybe not worth the effort or whatever? It's kind of the inverse of the question we just answered.
I've got one. Team building. How many times do we go off-site, have team building exercises, and then we go back to a dysfunctional organization? And all of it goes out the window. So I would say team building without some focus on structure and systemizing the organization can actually make it work in reverse.
Okay.
I'm going to say marketing. I think that marketing is essential, but it has to be targeted and it has to be well planned out. And what I notice that business owners tend to do is throw money at things. They don't necessarily have a good marketing strategy or a good marketing plan. And so therefore they blame the marketing for not working, and then they jump to another marketing company. And so I think that is one of the biggest problems and one of the lowest ROI, simply because there's no plan.
I'll just keep my focus kind of on trademarks for now. I think that the law changed back in 1988 to allow companies to file what we call intent-to-use trademark applications. And so that gives the ability for the trademark owner to do a filing when they eventually use the mark in connection with the goods and services claimed, all of the rights relate back to that filing date. So it's a very good practice. There's no ROI if you file too soon, though. You can only keep one of those pending for about 4 years. So if your product is not going to be on the market and available within, say, 4 years of your filing, it's too early to file. You can keep it alive for about that long, but to go beyond that would be too early.
Okay. A common issue that I see with the companies that I'm working with would be access to capital. Other common story you're hearing now with the economy as it is and tight labor market is folks having shortages in the workforce and having a hard time finding and hiring quality people. Other than access to capital and finding the right person, what are some of the other big challenges that you are seeing with your clients these days?
I would say accountability is a huge issue. We have our plans, we have our strategies in business, but how do we hold people accountable? I look at the internal because, there's so many businesses that have exceeded anyone's expectations, and there's a lot of people that say you can't do it, there's too many of you, and guess what? There's all sorts of examples where that's not true. Part of the problem along the way to busting through that is that the organization itself doesn't have a built-in way of holding people accountable. They don't have the right people in the right seats. They don't have the right metrics. They're not managing the finances. In fact, many of them aren't even looking at financials but once a quarter. The leadership team has no financial acumen. There isn't a weekly scorecard to tell you the pulse of your business. And all these things build into accountability. So to me, that is one of the gravest dangers for most businesses is just not understanding how to hold people accountable.
And have you seen that get worse more recently, or has it been kind of
I think it's
consistent?
It's consistent. If a visionary starts a company, typically visionaries, and this is a big generalization, typically visionaries don't enjoy holding people accountable. They want to, they love people. They're big people, big relationships, big ideas, right? And so accountability can be really, really uncomfortable. And it also could include family members. Businesses have family members involved, friendships. There's all the intermingling that you talked about earlier. So then accountability is compromised as well.
Okay. Either one?
Am I up? Okay.
Go ahead, Steve.
I think one of the things that I describe the internet as being is the Trademark Lawyers Relief Act. So I think, it's kind of a blessing and a curse as a business owner, right? You can be easily found, which is a wonderful thing. It can also not be a wonderful thing. If you haven't done the proper things to clear the name before you launch, it's so much easier for companies who are actively looking for targets to enforce their trademark rights against. You're visible in a way that you weren't before. And so I think companies need to bear that in mind and know that, especially if you're going to be launching a website, there are trademark owners that monitor not only the filings and what goes on at the Patent and Trademark Office, but they're constantly paying attention to who might be out there using a mark in a way that conflicts with the scope of the rights they believe that they have. And the costs of that can be significant in having to rebrand and to lose the investment in the name that you've used up to that point in time.
Julie, anything you want to add?
Sure. I think that just a plain reluctance to look at that end game is very common and still a problem. If you notice on your tables, there's a placard that has some statistics on it. Those statistics actually came from our market. So in 2017, the Exit Planning Institute conducted the State of Owner Readiness Survey here in the Twin Cities. And we had business owners anonymously fill out this survey from across industries, all sizes of companies all across the state, and we still have a problem. And clearly you can tell the majority of business owners have not even started their planning process, yet many of them plan to exit in 5 years or less.
All right. So let's see, I got a couple more questions here. Just looking at the time to try to get through them, I'm going to shift a little bit and say, okay, lightning round, like 30-second answers. This one is for Chris and Julie, and I know I have had a couple of panel discussions with women business owners, so I know it could fill the whole hour and a half, but for a 30-second answer, what would be a quick insight or two that you would share with other female business owners?
Great. Well, I do have half a dozen female business owners as clients right now. I am a female business owner, not women-owned yet. I'm 50-50 with my husband, but thinking about going to the 51%. I'm also a board member of the National Association of Women Business Owners, and we love to promote, help, inspire women to launch their own businesses. Unfortunately, we have women-owned businesses, but they seem to hit a ceiling at about $225K. And so we can't seem to get them up to the next level, and we're working very diligently at education, systems, structures, networking that can help boost women-owned businesses as well. But women-owned businesses also lack funding. They get about a third of the funding that male business owners have. So there's still some kind of bias there with women-owned businesses. With that said, women-owned businesses have grown 114% in the last 20 years. So there's a lot of headway being made and a lot of room for improvement, but we're on the right course.
Julie.
Definitely. I think that my biggest piece of advice for a women-owned business is just to get yourself a mentor. It's important to have someone with outside perspective that can actually help you grow and think about the next steps. And when you're on the inside, it's very difficult when you're in the day-to-day, and to have someone on the outside who you trust, who's a good fit for you and your business, to be able to help you think that through.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, another lightning round question. This time we'll include Steve. So kind of thinking common mistakes, again, on the topic of lesson learned. Steve, let's start with you. What do you see as the most common mistake that leads branding and trademark efforts to not create as much value as maybe they could have otherwise?
One of the things we haven't talked about is when thinking about what to call something, what the name is going to be of the business, or what the name will be of a particular product, there's a temptation of marketing folks and even engineers to want to be very descriptive and to kind of hit the consumer over the head with a very descriptive term, so you don't have to spend a lot of time, money, and effort educating them about what the offering provides. The best approach, which you would learn from working with a trademark professional, would be to say, inject just a little bit more creativity into that name and offer one that is suggestive but not descriptive. So I would say if you can suggest as opposed to describe, that would be perfect. Probably the best example I can think of is if you go to Dayquil or NyQuil, you'll see that they have a little floating feather as a logo. Metaphors and the idea of a restful sleep with that floating feather would be something that would be suggestive. Not, if you were selling down blankets, a floating feather would be descriptive. But if you have a floating feather that symbolizes restful sleep, now you've got something that's just creative enough to generate immediate trademark rights through a suggestive as opposed to descriptive mark.
Great. Common in your case, why do EOS things not work as well in the case of Julie, exit planning projects not work as well as they could?
Well, one would be flavor of the week. So if we don't stay focused, it's not going to work, because the EOS system is meant to be dialed in a year to 2 years before you get all the tools in place. And with that said, the other component is to share it with the rest of the organization. So many times we teach our leaders a certain way of operating, and we expect them then to be able to transfer that to the rest of the whole organization. One of my specialties is the rollout, the EOS rollout, where we actually take EOS into different divisions, departments, and the entire organization gets to go through the process. So everyone has a number, everyone's in a level 10 weekly meeting or a version of it. Sometimes we have to adapt that. And everyone has a rock, some goal that's over and above their day-to-day responsibilities.
Awesome. And I think as far as exit planning goes, One of the biggest mistakes, or when it doesn't work, is when an owner tries to put some kind of exit plan together themselves. It's really not a DIY project, and they think that they're saving money by not bringing in advisors who can help them with the process, and what they're actually doing is leaving money on the table most of the time. They're paying taxes that aren't necessary. They are not grooming themselves or grooming their successor well enough to take over. Many times an earnout goes bad because it's one-sided. The list goes on and on. So it's really not a DIY, and it does take more than just a few months to put a good, solid exit strategy together.
And multiple advisors, accountants,
And multiple advisors.
lawyers,
Yes.
exit planners,
Working
et
as a
cetera.
collaborative team.
EOS folks to get that implemented. All right.
Exactly.
Another lightning round. So we're still in the first quarter of 2019. What's a kind of a quick, easy thing that folks in the audience can implement, get going for the rest of the year to make 2019 numbers look better?
Want me to start?
Go right ahead.
Yeah, sure. I think that, to Chris's point, I think Chris brought up prioritizing and figuring out what it is that you really want to accomplish. But the prioritizing, I think, is really important, because I think that business owners many times will confuse activity with accomplishment, and they'll go to the lowest pain point and get those things done first, when in fact those should wait. And so anything that's a flaming inferno, start there.
I like to have my business owners go through a SWOT analysis. Have any of you done that? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So if they haven't done that, and I'm starting to work with them maybe a quarter into the year, I might just say, let's just quick do a SWOT. Let's take an hour and just brainstorm where we are with strengths, with organizations, weaknesses, which are internal, and then with opportunities, which are external, and threats. And just see strategically, with all our heads put together, are we really prioritizing the right thing? Because there's this concept called garbage in, garbage out. And if we don't have good coming in, we're not going to have the results that we're looking to achieve with our system called traction. So I'm always challenging, and you can do that at any point, in the course of the year, especially up front here after you've got some numbers back from first quarter to see where you're at. Then maybe we should do a SWOT analysis and just check in with what we said are our priorities, and making sure there's not too many, to Julie's point. 3 to 7.
3 to 7? Okay. Sounds good. Steve?
I think the beginning of the year is always a good time to do an intellectual property audit, no matter what stage of the business the business might be in. Figuring out what assets currently exist and whether they've been really secured or not. You need to collaborate with the United States government in many of the kinds of intellectual property to actually secure those rights, and their deadlines associated with doing that. It's usually, in many cases, not too late to come back, but in some cases it can be. And so I think working with a professional to identify what assets exist and then helping prioritize next action items over the course of the year and the coming years to help build out a portfolio of assets over time.
Great. All right, so kind of sum up the day, any kind of nuggets, pearls of wisdom, whether it's a, hey, don't do this, avoid this one, or hey, for sure do this one, but something to kind of wrap up today's session for our audience. Feel free to have at it.
Should I start us out? I would say getting really clear about what you want. If you're a business owner, get crystal clear, do some self-assessment, get therapy if you need to. Just get clear on what you really want out of your business. Because once you become clear, then it's easy to figure out how to implement that. Maybe not easy, but it's a lot easier than it is when you're unclear and you're chasing everything. Then find help with, as Julie said, find the help you need to make that happen. Get a system, get a coach, get a group like a roundtable, CEO roundtable, very helpful, can get into more detail with your organization. So clarity is so powerful. So get clear.
Awesome. I guess I'd say the same thing. I think that clarity is huge. And I think that keeping it simple is a good thing too, because we can get pretty complicated in our plans, and then we get overwhelmed, and then pretty soon we're not implementing. I don't know how many times I've met with a business owner and they have their plan neatly folded and stuck in a drawer and haven't looked at it since they went to the bank. And so keep it simple.
I think I'll end where we started in talking about Duets Blog and say our time has been limited here today. If you have any interest in intellectual property, Duets Blog is an enormous resource that's free. I would encourage you to check it out. If you haven't been enticed already, maybe this will help. Seth Godin, New York Times best-selling author, marketing guru, he has come by and wildly kind of endorsed the blog. I did an interview with Seth Godin on our blog. I'd encourage you to check that out. It's a resource that has a lot of information there, and we try to communicate in an entertaining way, so hopefully it'll be of value to you.
All right, well, thank you. Again, we have the room as long as anybody would like to stay. I see Chum Struve in the back. Chum runs Club E over in St. Paul, and the meeting tomorrow actually at lunch is Leading Millennials. So anybody who wants to learn about managing millennials can attend Chum's meeting. I did mention earlier that April 11th is our next Club E session here, and we're doing that with the EPI, Exit Planning Institute. So that's a joint meeting. So please come if you'd like to partake in that. And again, that's about recruiting, retaining, and incenting employees. And Chris is here to tell anybody who wants to learn more about EOS. So please seek out your panelists and feel free to reach out to me if you'd like additional information. Thank you for being here, and have a great rest of your week. Thank you, panelists.
Thank you very much.